Welcome, you have Ryan here, and decided to play a game of Smoke Jumpers. The printing I'm using is the fourth printing, and that is largely the same as all the previous three printings. The counters are different in art design, and there are some additional optional rules with this fourth printing, but everything else, all the other rules and the charts, etc., are the same. I've decided to play the Situation 1, which is an average day, and we'll be using a couple optional rules. One is hose, and the other is line building characteristics, which will affect water application. And so for this game, as you'll see, as I use water during certain time period of the day, any water you apply will suffer an evaporation penalty. Other than that, I'll be using just all the base rules and no house rules. And with this playthrough, I won't be going heavy into rules. I'll just try to focus on narrating the gameplay itself, and I will not delve heavily into the rules. So the average day scenario, it's one of the easier scenarios. You're only going to have one start. A couple other scenarios, such as thunderstorm or dry lightning, will allow you to potentially have multiple starts. Starts off with a light wind and initial moisture content of 16. So that gives us a forward rate of spread of 2 hexes for any head fire. Flanking fire will start out at with 1 rate of spread, and backing fire will have also a value of 1 rate of spread. So I've elected to start off with 2 smoke jumpers and a transport aircraft and 1 helicopter, and those will all start off board, and the smoke jumpers will be delivered via the transport aircraft if we do have a start, and the helicopter will call if needed. So the game day starts at 12 p.m. and we roll for a weather change and do not get any weather change, and roll for an ignition, and we do not get an ignition, so we'll push straight on to 1 o'clock now. At 1 o'clock, we do not have an adjustment for wind or moisture, and we do roll for weather variability and get no change. Now we'll roll again for a fire, and we do get an ignition report, and a random drop of the counter puts the fire ignition at hex 1908. With the fire report, now we will go ahead and launch the smoke jumper aircraft with the 2 smoke jumper crews, and make a designate hex 1808 and hex 1909 as a targeted landing zone for each. We'll roll for drift, and fortunately they land at their desired hex. With our wind out of the southeast and pushing toward the northwest, we're going to split both crews. They're going to flank the fire with one heading west toward the head, and the other is going to head east and try to hook around the heel of the fire, and eventually plan to work up the right flank. Each smoke jumper crew has to expend 1 movement point to jump out of the aircraft, and they have 4 left, so they'll move a hex, construct 1 line, and then move another hex, construct a line, and they'll move each one 1 hex further out. And we'll also use the helicopter we had on standby, bring that in, and he'll drop a couple points worth of water toward the head of the fire, in front of the head of the fire. And since we're using that water evaporation rule, and with the fire's current spread and the potential spread due to any increase in wind, that water drop is not going to be terribly effective, and it could get burned over, but if the fire does have an increase in rate of spread, it'll at least slow that head fire down. I'm opting to take a kind of a wider approach here around the fire. You'll notice I did not go direct right around that 1 ignition hex in case there's a wind shift. I don't think I'll be able to hold that line, and any crews right adjacent to the fire are likely to get burned over if there's a wind shift. So given a wide berth right now. And that concludes all of the actions our resources on the board can currently take. So I'm going to order 2 more smoke jumpers for the next turn, so they'll be delivered aerially via that same transport aircraft, and we'll have that helicopter come back. And now we're going to move right into the 2 o'clock hour. We do have a required adjustment to moisture content, so that'll drop one from 16 to 15. It doesn't change our rate of spread, but if we do get an increase in winds, it will increase the maximum head rate of spread compared to the previous value. We'll roll for weather variability, and we get no change. So the rate of spread is still going to be 2 forward and 1 for flank and backing growth. And the fire area on this map is primarily dominated by coniferous fuel type, and that forest type has a pretty high rate of spread. So the fire does not have a lot of resistance to movement. We do have some hexes, a few hexes just to the east of the fire that are classified as mixed wood, and it's a little harder for the fire to burn into there, so that'll be to our advantage. And there is some deciduous forest both to the north and south, but that's not it's not going to have much of an effect on the overall rate of spread where our fire is currently located. Off to the north, on the northwest side of the map, we have a road that'll offer a good barrier if the fire does get that far, and off to the northeast we have a river or a creek which also offers a nice barrier if the fire does make it that far. So we'll cover fire growth now, and that little bit of line we put in on the south end of the fire is easily enough to check the flanking and backing fire spread, but where we didn't have line, the fire does burn to the north, and that head fire is actually checked by the water drop from the helicopter. Now we did lose, we went from a 2 to a 1 this turn because the moisture content decreased, and so that optional rule forces us to drop that water level by 1, but that was enough to hold that head fire in check from spreading 1 additional hex. With the fire spread done now for this turn, we'll go ahead and move on to our resource phase. So the 2 new smoke jumper crews we ordered are going to fly in, and I'm going to designate hex 1906 and 1805 as the target hexes, 1 crew for each. The smoke jumper in 1906, they do get hit by some drift and are pushed 1 space, 1 hex northwest, and so they'll land with their buddies in 1805. Now what I want to do here is I dropped these guys near the head of the fire, and so with those 3 crews on that northwest end, I really want to put a hurt on the head of the fire and get some hand line in there with those crews. And the 1 crew off to the southeast, we're going to have him kind of leapfrog out ahead, pass through that mixed wood area, and hopefully that mixed wood will be enough to check that backing spread of the fire, and then he'll start building line up the right flank. So we've got enough people where we can put a lot of line there at the head of the fire, and it should be enough. So looking ahead at next turn, the fire is going to have at least a forward rate, head fire speed of 3 hexes, and potentially speed of 4 hexes. We were able to add a strength of 4 hand line to each of those 2 hexes, and they inherently have a resistance of 1, so it gives it'll require the fire to have a momentum of 5 to enter each hex from 1806 to 1807, assuming the wind doesn't change and the fire wants to move to the northwest. The line we put in for strength in each hex ought to be enough to stop a head fire from 1806 or 1807 spreading to the northwest. If we do get a wind shift, let's say it comes out of the south and blows to the north, that is going to put us in a bad position. And we did move up that flank a little bit, the right flank, from the mixed woods. And that smoke jumper crew there by itself on that right flank did get reinforced with a water drop from that helicopter. He is the most exposed of the group, and if we do get a wind shift out of the south blowing to the north, I do believe he's probably going to have to evacuate and get burned over or lose his line. So hopefully we will not have to deal with that. And that's going to put us at the end of our turn for the 2 o'clock hour, and our total cost now is up to $9,000, and the victory limit for this scenario is $10,000. So we've only got about $1,000 to spare, and that's good enough for 1 more hour's use with the helicopter. We can certainly spend more money and go over that limit. And even if we do contain the fire and are successful there, if you go over that $10,000 limit, your victory would then get reduced to a marginal or worse loss, depending on the kind of the financial situation. So hopefully we'll be able to hold here around $9,000 or $10,000. We're going to start the 3 o'clock hour now, and we do have another hard change for the moisture content, so it drops, and we're now at a head fire rate of spread of 3. And we roll for weather variability, and no change there, so that's great. That means our lines at the head of the fire are going to be sufficient to hold. There's a strength of 5 there, 4 from the resistance that the hand line provides, and then 1 from the inherent resistance in that fuel type, that coniferous forest. So the fire's growth is completely restricted now within the lines we've already constructed, and within that vegetation change back near the heel of the fire. So all 4 crews are going to focus on extinguishing, and we've got enough strength to knock out or extinguish the 3 hexes adjacent to our smoke jumper crews. The intensity of a conifer hex is 5, and each smoke jumper crew is able to take 5 actions and apply one strength toward each action is worth 1 strength. So if it uses all 5 actions to extinguish a fire, that's all it can do in a turn. So the 3 of these crews will knock out or extinguish the fire in an adjacent hex, and then 1 crew is going to move down to the south and reinforce a bit of line there just in case we get a wind shift. We'll also use the helicopter, bring it back, spend our last $1,000, and just reinforce that line to the north as well. And it's not necessarily the wisest use of that helicopter, but if we do get a wind shift out of the south blowing to the north, it will help to arrest any flank spread to the west into Hex 1906, where we have a smoke jumper crew. Okay, so now we'll, having completed all of the resource actions, we'll go ahead and move into the 4 o'clock hour, but just before we do so, not going to call any resources next turn, so we'll have the helicopter sit since we're now having expended $10,000. If we can contain the fire, and I think we can, we'll maintain a victory, and if we do spend over that, we'll suffer a minor loss even if we do contain the fire. So we'll just have these 4 smoke jumper crews tomorrow for the next hour, but I think all should be well. Our moisture content does go down 1, but the head fire value is still 3. And we roll for weather variability, and we do get a wind direction shift. And rolling an odd number, we move the wind direction counterclockwise. So it goes, instead of pointing northwest, it now points to the southwest. And that was a favorable change because it drove, there's only 2 hexes left that fire can spread from, and that is 2007 and 1908. And with 2007 blowing right into 1908, that's not a concern. 1908, the fire in that hex can spread into 1808. However, we do have a handline value of 3 plus the inherent resistance of 1 within the conifer hex. So there's a value of 4 there, and it only has the head fire to the southwest will have a momentum of 3. So that's not enough to enter hex 1808, and the lines in 1909 and 2008 and the fuel type in 2108 and 2107 are enough to check any fire spread. So now all that's left to do is move our pieces up adjacent to the last 2 smoldering hexes, and we easily have enough movement points to extinguish those. It's a 5 per hex, so we easily have enough. We have 10 points between all of the jumpers. So we're able to extinguish the fire. The fire is not going to spread anymore, and that's a victory because we did not go over our $10,000 limit. Do a little recap here. So if we, instead of a wind shift to the southwest, had it shifted to the north, we would have been in a fair bit of trouble there. We would have had 1 crew that was definitely overrun there in Hex 1906. The water in that space did suffer evaporation. So between 1 water strength, 1 handline strength, and then the inherent value of 1, we only had a I guess, a resistance of 3 to the fire spread, and the head fire is at 3, so it would have burned into that hex. So that was a gamble on my part. Lucky it didn't happen that way, but this was a pretty easy, or it went well. Let's not say it's easy, but it went well. We could have had a couple rolls there that might have changed, weather changes that would have changed direction or added, increased the wind speed that could have given us a lot more difficulty. This map is not roaded very well, just on the exterior. So I elected to use smoke jumpers just because of access. Otherwise you would have had to drive some ground crews in, and they would have had to hike in, which would have given the fire more time and space to grow. So with this map, once I selected it, I automatically just went with smoke jumpers and had a helicopter on standby ready to go. It probably would have been more prudent to have 4 smoke jumper crews on standby instead of just 2 at the beginning. Had I had 4, I probably would have put this out a lot quicker than the 4 turns it took. So just to close out here, stats for nerds, we've got a final fire size of 5 hectares, or just over 12 acres for smoke jumper crews. So that's 16 smoke jumpers, used 1 helicopter, 1 transport plane, with a total cost of 10,000 acres, and it took about 4 hours to get the fire all corralled up. Anyway, hope you enjoyed watching and listening, and plan on doing a couple more situations just to illustrate some different maps in the game and different fire situations. Anyway, thanks.